Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 2.1, which is our first official lesson in our second unit in I.mp History 1, which is authoritarian leaders. And what we're going to be discussing today is Hitler's rise to power part 1. So this is going to be a two-part series in his rise to power. So by the end of our lesson today, you should be able to explain the conditions in Germany that allowed Hitler to rise to power. And those conditions were impact of war, the outcome of the Treaty of Versailles, social divisions, weakness of political system, and economic factors. So we're going to discuss each one of these 5 different aspects that are going to help lead Hitler's rise to power. So the first thing we're going to talk about is impact of war. So the question of this is, how did war impact Germany and help establish a condition that would cause people to want to vote or support someone like Adolf Hitler? So we're referring to World War I, by the way. Okay, so Germans felt absolutely devastated and humiliated after the defeat in World War I. We already know the stories of World War I, that Austria-Hungary was technically the one that started it, but Germany is the one that's given most of the blame. And so World War I was fought from 1914 to 1918. And then at the end of 1918, in November 1918, is when Germany surrendered at the end of World War I. And so in 1918, resentment is going to come in once Germans start buying into this idea of the stabbed in the back myth. And what this means is that many people in Germany felt betrayed by their government, by government leaders, and by military officials, because they felt that the army had felt that they had been betrayed because of left-wing radicals and those that signed the armistice to end the war. So many people who were proud Germans felt that, Germany could have won this war, and that this new, the emperor has now abdicated, he's gone, and this new republic that Germany has, so Germany is now going to be a republic, they all signed this treaty, and now these people feel like they've been stabbed in the back. And so those people who actually did sign the document that ended the war, they're known as November criminals. So this is a term that you could actually use. So November criminals are considered, or those people who are called November criminals are the ones that actually signed the peace treaty that ended World War I and actually signed the armistice that ended World War I. And the reason why they're called November criminals is because World War I ended on November 11th. And so people are angered by the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which came out at the Paris Peace Conference. And the reason why they're upset about it is because Germany was really blasted in this treaty, and Germany had very little say in any of the terms of this treaty. Literally, at the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles was pretty much handed to Germany, and they were told to sign it, or war could potentially resume back, and Germany did not have the money or the ability to be able to continue fighting. So taking a deeper dive into that Treaty of Versailles, what exactly did the Treaty of Versailles do? Well, the Treaty of Versailles officially ended World War I for Germany, but it had a lot of political and economic changes that are going to come to Germany as a result of this treaty. So first of all, reparations were required. So Germany is now required to pay reparations to allied nations for all of the war damage, because remember, they're now considered responsible, so they're going to have to pay for it. Germany was required to accept Article 231 under the Treaty of Versailles, and that article was the War Guilt Clause. You do need to know that. Germany was forced to accept the Treaty of Versailles, which included this Article 231, and that article said that Germany was 100% responsible for World War I. So everything, every death, every atrocity was completely contributed to Germany. Okay? Next, there was a reduction in their armed forces. They could have no more than 100,000 people in their army. This is a country that had, well over several 100,000 people in their army during World War I. Now they can have no more than 100,000, and they can have no submarines and no air force. Fourthly, all of their overseas colonies are now handed over to the Allies. Germany lost every single one of their colonies in Africa and in Asia. And then they also lost territory in Europe. And so this just runs down a short little list of places that they lost territory. They lost Alsace-Lorraine to France. They lost Schleswig to Denmark. They lost parts of Prussia to Poland. And then there's the whole thing with the Polish corridor that was a little piece of land taken away from Germany just to give Poland a access to the sea, and they literally gave them like not even a 10-mile strip of land to give them access to the sea. So Germany lost a lot of territory as a result of this war. So in 1918, we have the end of World War I, and of course Germany is now in chaos, and so this is going to lead to social division. So there's massive loss of life at the end of World War I. There's also a global pandemic going on in 1918. This was the Spanish flu. So yes, all the pandemic stuff that's been going on recently in our lives, this is just 100 years removed from a previous global pandemic in 1918. So Germany is not only facing the massive loss of life from World War I, but it's also facing a global pandemic in 1918. And of course, factor all of that into the Kaiser or the emperor has abdicated. And so it's created a power vacuum that has allowed communists to rise up in the streets. So communism is becoming more and more popular, especially now that Russia has become communist by this point in 1918. Or at least the Russian Tsar has been toppled and a preliminary communist government is being created in Russia. And then as a result of the Kaiser abdicating and Germany breaking down into social division, there's going to be a German revolution. And this leads to civil unrest, and one of those unrests is known as the Spartacist uprising. Now, the Spartacists are a group of ragtag individuals that did not support, they were very angry that Germany had lost the war, and they were very angry that Germany was forced to go through what they were going through. So these were kind of like nationalists, German nationalists that are angry with what's happening, and they're angry with the German government, so they're going to protest as a result. And so there's political clashes between communists and socialists. And so that's what this Spartacist uprising is. You're going to see many Germans that don't like communists, and so the Spartacists are more the socialists. And so the revolution ended with the creation of the Weimar Republic in 1919. So the reason why it's called Weimar is that's actually a city in Germany, and that's where the Constitution was written to create the Weimar Republic. So in 1919, Germany is going to officially drop being the German Empire and become the Republic of Germany under the Weimar Republic. And then, of course, as a result of that, many political parties are developed, and so there's going to be multi-party elections held in Germany to establish and create a new parliament. These are the 5 political parties that were really prominent within the Weimar Republic. And so the 5 are the Social Democratic Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, the German People's Party, the Catholic Center Party, and the Communist Party. So these are all in blue, so you do need to make sure you jot these down. And this particular column gives you a little bit of background information about what this party would support or believe in. So for example, let's just take a look at the Catholic Center Party, or Zentrum as it was known. And so this tells you what this was about. It was supported by Catholics and moderate Protestant Christians. This party was centrist politically, meaning that it's a little bit left and a little bit right. So if you're centrist, you got a little mixture there of both, but had opinions all across the political spectrum. It was part of many governing coalitions in Germany. So if you remember, we talked about governing coalitions in our fictitious country in Zealandia, and so Germany had the same thing. This Germany's government was largely based on coalitions, where the Catholic Center Party would be one of those parties that would come together to create a government. So again, pause this particular slide to take a look at these political parties. Make sure you understand what each of these parties would advocate for by really digesting all the information in this right-hand column. Next, let's take a look at the 4th issue facing Germany is the weakness of their political system. So we've already established that, in 1919, Germany is going to create the Weimar Republic. So this is going to replace the German Empire. So they have this new government, but it is a weak political system. Because the Constitution, it is very liberal, so that's not a bad thing, but the Constitution is liberal. The president is elected every 7 years, and that person appoints the chancellor. Okay, so that's kind of the president is elected by the people, and then that person, whoever the president is the person that's appointing the chancellor of Germany. The people of Germany are allowed to elect a Reichstag, which is a parliament. So Germany's parliament is known as the Reichstag, and now the people in Germany are allowed to elect that, just like we are allowed to elect Congress in the United States. But the major weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution are this. In Article 48 of the Constitution, it grants emergency powers that could be abused. So, for example, in the United States Constitution, our Constitution does give the president the power to declare martial law in the state of insurrection or something like that. The only president to do so is Abraham Lincoln. He did that during the Civil War. So our Constitution does provide that, but the Weimar Constitution made it very easy. All the president had to do was invoke Article 48, and then they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. They also had proportional representation in Reichstag, guaranteeing no majority government. So what this means is that in proportional representation is that if there are, let's say there were 500 seats in Parliament, so let's say there were 500 seats, they will look at however many political parties there were, and in the previous slide I think there were 5, so they will look at the percentages. So if party 1 got 10% of the seats, or 10% of the votes, they would get 10% of the seats. So what this entails then is that if you look at all 5 political parties and then if you know one political party is ever going to get 50% of the vote. So what this means is that it guarantees there's never going to be a majority government, which means you're always going to have governments forced to work with each other. Uprisings were also extremely common. One of the biggest ones to know is the Kapp-Putsch, which is very similar to the Munich Hall beer putsch. This is just another common uprising that was happening in 1920s against the Weimar Republic. So it's not necessarily one you need to know per se, but it's just an example of showing you that there are lots of uprisings going on in the 1920s. Now things will improve after 1923 economic crisis, but people are going to start growing very impatient with democracy, because you have to remember Germany has been an empire and was ruled by an emperor for many, many years. The German people don't know what democracy is. So these people are now frustrated with the whole thing about proportional representation and, no majority, so things don't normally get done. So people will it will improve in 1923 a little bit, but people are starting to get very disgruntled with democracy. And lastly, let's take a look at economic factors that are going to help lead Adolf Hitler to become the leader of Germany. So, at the end of World War I, we have massive economic crisis going on in Germany. There's a lot of war debt. There's unemployment that is massive. There's this huge reparation bill that Germany is now forced to pay, because remember, they are 100% responsible for World War I, and they have to pay for every single thing that was damaged. And so the bill is sent to Germany is some ostentatious, off-the-wall number. I mean, Germany's never going to be able to pay this back. Germany struggled to make payments for these reparation payments. So as a result of Germany's inability to pay, because keep in mind this is also the 1920s. So if you know anything about world history, the Great Depression is going on. So Germany is already defeated at the end of World War I, and then the 1920s come in and the Great Depression happens, and Germany is, totally blindsided. So by the end of the 1920s, when the Great Depression really starts to come in, and throughout the 1930s, Germany is going to be devastated. But when Germany starts to fault on these reparation payments, then France is going to invade the Ruhr Valley. That's a part of Germany. So France actually invaded Germany in the 1920s to steal, I don't say steal, but they took coal away from Germans' coal fields, because the Ruhr Valley is where Germany's coal is located. So France literally marched in and stole, took over Germany's coal fields so that they could, that was their answer. If you can't pay, then we'll just go into your country and take your coal. There was also a hyperinflation crisis in 1923 where literally like a loaf of bread, you would have to take like several wheelbarrows of German Deutschmarks, which is their money. You would have to take wheelbarrows. This is a picture of kids playing, building, a tower. That's German money. That's how much money it would take for one parent to go to buy like a loaf of bread. And so that's what the hyperinflation crisis was. Mid-1920s economy improves with loans from the United States. This is known as the golden age of Weimar, because eventually the United States starts giving money to the Germans to help try to get them restabilized, and so this does help tremendously. But not all of the people benefited, however. Farmers and those who were ruined by the financial crisis are still getting the raw end of the deal. And sadly, in 1929, when the Wall Street crash happened, that was the final nail in the coffin for Germany. There was high unemployment, businesses closed, unemployment went from 1.7 million to 8 million from 1929 to 1933. 1.7 to 8 million, that's a huge increase. And then loans from the United States, they started getting called in, because when the financial crisis hit the United States, we cut off the money, so there was no more money for Germany, and then we started asking for it back. So that does conclude Adolf Hitler's Rise to Power Part 1. So this is a two-part series. So the lesson has concluded. Can you explain the conditions in Germany that allowed Hitler to come to power? Can you explain how impact of war did so? How did the outcome of the Treaty of Versailles impact Hitler's rise to power? Social division in Germany, how did that create Hitler's rise to power? The weakness of their political system, how did that impact Hitler's rise to power? And the poor economic conditions in Germany after World War I, how did that help establish and pave a way for Adolf Hitler to become the next dictator of Germany? Thank you so much for your time on this lesson. If you know the answer to these questions, pat yourself on the back. You're doing an amazing job. If you will, find any activities for lesson 2.1, complete that, and then once you do so, move on to lesson 2.2. You're an amazing group of kids. Have a great day. See you soon.